Imagine standing at the crossroads between absolute power and moral duty. Picture a moment when saying no to a king could mean death, but saying yes could cost innocent lives. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a hospital security guard whose unwavering principles turned him from an unknown protector into a legend of courage. In the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Medical Center, where life and death decisions happen every minute, one man's refusal to bend became the barrier between chaos and order. When the most powerful person in the kingdom demanded entry into a quarantine medical suite during a deadly outbreak, Marcus didn't just guard a door, he guarded the future of an entire nation. This isn't just a story about following rules. It's about the moment when one person's conscience became stronger than fear, when duty to humanity outweighed duty to power, and when a simple no echoed through history as the loudest act of heroism anyone had ever witnessed. Marcus Chen had been walking the same corridors of St. Mary's Medical Center for 12 years, and every step still felt like a sacred duty. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that his job wasn't just about checking identification cards or monitoring security cameras. He was the guardian of hope, the protector of the most vulnerable people in the kingdom, and he took that responsibility more seriously than most people took their marriages. The medical center stood like a beacon of healing in the heart of the capital city, its white walls gleaming under the morning sun as Marcus began his shift that fateful Tuesday in March. He moved through his morning routine with the precision of a military officer, checking each entrance, testing each alarm system, and greeting every staff member with the same warm smile that had become his trademark over the years. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of infectious diseases, paused at the main security desk, as she always did during her morning rounds. She had known Marcus since her first day as a resident, and she often said he was the backbone of the entire facility. "Another quiet morning, I hope," she said, adjusting her white coat and preparing for what she expected would be a routine day of patient consultations and medical reviews. Marcus nodded, but something in his experienced eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when trouble was brewing, a skill that came from years of watching human behavior under the most stressful circumstances imaginable. "In a place like this, quiet mornings can change in seconds," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many emergencies to take peace for granted. The morning progressed normally until around 10 o'clock, when the first ambulance arrived with sirens wailing like banshees through the crisp morning air. Marcus watched through the reinforced glass windows as paramedics rushed a patient through the emergency entrance, their faces masked and their movements urgent in a way that spoke of something more serious than a typical medical emergency. Within the hour, 3 more ambulances had arrived, each carrying patients who seemed to share similar symptoms that Marcus couldn't quite identify from his position at the security desk. The medical staff moved with increased urgency, and he noticed that several doctors and nurses had begun wearing additional protective equipment beyond their normal uniforms. Dr. Martinez appeared at his desk again, but this time her usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something that looked like controlled panic. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed paperwork, and her eyes kept darting toward the emergency department, where the new patients had been taken. "Marcus," she said, her voice lower than usual, "I need you to pay special attention to who comes and goes today. We might be dealing with something that requires extra security measures." She didn't elaborate, but the way she emphasized the word extra told Marcus everything he needed to know about the seriousness of the situation. As the day progressed, Marcus began to piece together fragments of conversations and observe patterns in the staff behavior that painted a picture of a developing crisis. Nurses whispered in corners about isolation protocols, doctors made hurried phone calls to government health agencies, and the entire atmosphere of the medical center shifted from routine healing to emergency response mode. By early afternoon, the 4th floor of the medical center had been cleared of all non-essential personnel, and Marcus received official orders to establish a security perimeter around what was now being called the containment zone. He stood at his new post outside the elevator bank that led to the 4th floor, watching as medical personnel in full hazmat suits moved in and out of the restricted area like astronauts exploring an alien world. The patients who had arrived that morning were now confirmed to be suffering from a highly contagious respiratory illness that appeared to be spreading faster than anything the medical team had encountered in recent years. The symptoms were severe, the transmission rate was alarming, and the mortality risk was still being determined through urgent testing and analysis. Marcus understood that his role had suddenly evolved from routine security guard to the human barrier between a potential outbreak and the safety of the general public. He took his position at the containment zone entrance with the same seriousness that a soldier might take when defending his homeland from invasion. Dr. Martinez approached him one final time that afternoon, her face now showing the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting an invisible enemy for hours.
Marcus, I want you to understand what we're dealing with here.
This illness appears to be highly infectious, and we don't yet know all the ways it can spread. Nobody enters this zone without proper authorization and protective equipment. Nobody leaves without following decontamination procedures. And nobody, regardless of their position or authority, gets access unless they're on the approved list. She handed him a clipboard with fewer than 20 names on it, each representing a medical professional who had been specifically trained and equipped to work in the containment environment. This list doesn't change unless I personally give you a new one. Not for administrators, not for government officials, not for anyone. Do you understand? Marcus took the clipboard and studied each name carefully, committing them to memory the way he had learned to memorize emergency procedures during his security training years earlier. I understand completely, Dr. Martinez. This zone is sealed except for authorized medical personnel. As the afternoon turned to evening, Marcus remained at his post, watching as the medical team worked tirelessly to treat patients and prevent the spread of what they were now calling a significant infectious disease outbreak. He saw the dedication in their eyes, the urgency in their movements, and the careful precision with which they followed every safety protocol. The hospital's public address system crackled to life several times throughout the evening, announcing visiting restrictions and advising the public to avoid the medical center unless they required emergency treatment. Marcus knew that these announcements meant the situation was being taken seriously at the highest levels of government and medical authority. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, Marcus was approached by James Wilson, the hospital's chief administrator, a man known for his political connections and his tendency to prioritize public relations over medical necessities. Wilson carried himself with the self-importance of someone who believed his administrative title gave him authority over medical decisions. Chen, Wilson said, using Marcus's last name in a way that was clearly intended to establish dominance. I need you to understand that there may be some VIP visits to the facility tonight. Government officials, health ministry representatives, people who need to see firsthand what we're dealing with here. When they arrive, you'll need to provide them with immediate access to all areas of the hospital. Marcus looked at the clipboard in his hands, then back at Wilson. Sir, I have specific orders from Dr. Martinez regarding access to the containment zone. Nobody enters without being on this authorized list and having proper protective equipment. Wilson's face reddened slightly, and his voice took on the tone of someone who wasn't accustomed to having his authority questioned. Chen, I'm telling you that there will be government officials who need access. These are people whose authority supersedes hospital protocols. Do you understand what I'm saying? Marcus remained calm, but his grip on the clipboard tightened. Sir, I understand what you're saying, but my orders are clear. Dr. P. Martinez made it very specific that nobody enters the containment zone unless they're on this list, regardless of their position or authority. She said this was a matter of public safety. Wilson stared at Marcus for a long moment, clearly frustrated by the guard's refusal to bend to administrative pressure. We'll see about that, he muttered before walking away, his footsteps echoing through the corridor with the sharp sound of expensive shoes on polished floors. Marcus remained at his post, knowing that his quiet act of defiance had likely set in motion a chain of events that would test his resolve in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He looked down at the clipboard again, reading each authorized name and understanding that his willingness to follow medical protocols over administrative demands might soon put him in direct conflict with forces much more powerful than a hospital administrator. As the evening progressed, Marcus received updates from the medical team about the patients in the containment zone. The illness was proving to be even more serious than initially thought, with a transmission rate that could potentially affect hundreds of people if proper containment measures weren't maintained. Every breach of protocol could lead to exponential spread throughout the community. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a heavy cloak, but it was a weight he accepted willingly. He had spent 12 years protecting the people in this medical center, and he wasn't about to stop now, regardless of what challenges the night might bring. Around 10 o'clock, As the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, Marcus received a radio call from the main security desk informing him that several black vehicles had arrived in the hospital parking lot. Through the windows, he could see men in expensive suits walking toward the main entrance, their movements suggesting official government business. Marcus checked his clipboard one more time, knowing that the most difficult test of his career was about to begin. He had made a commitment to follow medical protocols and protect public safety, and he intended to honor that commitment, regardless of who might demand otherwise. The quiet corridors of St. and a Crypto, Mary's Medical Center, were about to become the stage for a confrontation that would define not only Marcus Chen's legacy, but also set a precedent for how medical protocols would be balanced against political authority in times of crisis. As he stood guard outside the containment zone, Marcus prepared himself for a battle that would test every principle he had learned during his years of dedicated service. The black vehicles moved through the hospital parking lot like a funeral procession, their tinted windows reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the medical center's exterior. Marcus watched from his position at the fourth-floor containment zone as the convoy came to a stop near the main entrance, and he immediately understood that this wasn't going to be an ordinary government inspection. The first person to emerge from the lead vehicle was Colonel Harrison, the head of the Royal Security Detail, a man whose reputation for efficient ruthlessness was known throughout the kingdom. He moved with the calculated precision of someone who had spent decades ensuring that no obstacle ever impeded the will of the monarchy. Behind him came a collection of advisors, medical consultants, and political officials who formed the advance team for what Marcus now realized was going to be a royal visit. The radio on Marcus's belt crackled to life with an urgent message from the main security desk. "Marcus, this is Control. We have a situation developing downstairs. The Royal Security Detail is requesting immediate access to all areas of the hospital for a security sweep. They're saying the king will be arriving within the hour for an inspection of the outbreak situation." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but his voice remained steady as he responded. "Control, acknowledged. I'm maintaining my position at the containment zone perimeter as ordered. All access protocols remain in effect until I receive new orders from Dr. Martinez." Within minutes, Marcus could hear the elevator ascending to the fourth floor, its mechanical hum growing louder as it approached his level. The doors opened with a soft chime, and Colonel Harrison stepped out, followed by 3 other security officers and James Wilson, who wore the satisfied expression of someone who believed he was about to be vindicated. "Guard Chen," Colonel Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. "I am Colonel Harrison, head of His Majesty's Security Detail. We are conducting an advanced security sweep of this facility in preparation for a royal inspection. I need you to provide us with immediate access to this restricted area, so we can ensure the safety of His Majesty when he arrives." Marcus stood at attention, showing respect for the colonel's rank while maintaining his position in front of the containment zone entrance. "Colonel Harrison, sir, I understand your requirements, but I have specific medical orders regarding access to this area. The zone is under strict quarantine protocols due to a highly infectious disease outbreak. Access is limited to authorized medical personnel with proper protective equipment." Colonel Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, and Marcus could see that the security chief was not accustomed to having his requests questioned by anyone, much less a hospital security guard. "Guard Chen, I believe you may not fully understand the situation. His Majesty the King has expressed his desire to personally observe the medical response to this outbreak. This is a matter of national security and royal prerogative. Your medical protocols are superseded by royal authority." Wilson stepped forward, clearly relishing the moment he believed would put Marcus in his place. "Chen, I tried to explain this to you earlier. When the king wants access to something, that access is provided, period. No exceptions, no protocols, no medical orders that can override royal authority." Marcus looked at both men, understanding that he was facing the most significant challenge of his professional life. He had spent 12 years building a reputation for reliability, integrity, and unwavering commitment to his duties. Now those very qualities were putting him in direct conflict with the most powerful political authority in the kingdom. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand the importance of royal authority, and I respect His Majesty's concern about this outbreak. However, Martinez has made it clear that anyone entering this containment zone without proper protective equipment could become infected and then spread the disease to others. That would include His Majesty and anyone in his entourage. Colonel Harrison stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that the guard could see the cold calculation in the security chief's eyes. "Chen, let me be very clear about something. His Majesty's safety is my responsibility, and I will make the determination about what safety measures are appropriate. Your job is to provide access when requested by proper authority. I am that proper authority." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy fog. He could see that Wilson was practically vibrating with anticipation of his humiliation, and he understood that Colonel Harrison was a man who would not hesitate to use force if necessary to achieve his objectives. But he also knew that Dr. Martinez had trusted him with protecting not just the patients in the containment zone, but potentially the entire population from the spread of a dangerous infectious disease. "Colonel," Marcus said, "I need to contact Dr. Martinez to discuss the safety protocols for a royal visit. If His Majesty wants to observe the medical response, I'm certain we can arrange a way for that to happen safely, but I cannot simply ignore medical quarantine procedures without proper authorization from the medical team." The tension in the corridor became palpable as Colonel Harrison considered his options. Marcus could see the security chief calculating the political implications of forcing his way past a hospital security guard versus the potential consequences of allowing that same guard to delay royal plans. "You have 2 minutes to contact your Dr. Pease. Martinez," Harrison finally said. "If she doesn't immediately authorize access for His Majesty's security team, I will consider you to be obstructing royal business, which is a serious criminal offense in this kingdom." Marcus used his radio to contact Dr. Martinez, who was still working frantically in the containment zone, treating patients and coordinating the medical response to the outbreak. When she answered, her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a medical emergency for more than 12 hours. "Dr. Martinez, this is Marcus. I have Colonel Harrison from the Royal Security Detail here requesting access to the containment zone for a security sweep in advance of a royal visit. He's asking me to override the quarantine protocols." There was a long pause before Dr. Whitaker says, Martinez responded, and Marcus could hear the sound of medical equipment and urgent conversations in the background. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. We now have confirmed cases of human-to-human transmission at a rate that could create a pandemic if we don't maintain strict containment. Anyone who enters this zone without full protective equipment and decontamination procedures could become a carrier who spreads this disease throughout the general population. That includes royalty, government officials, anyone." Colonel Harrison gestured impatiently for Marcus to hand him the radio, but the guard shook his head and continued his conversation. "Doctor, Colonel Harrison is saying that royal authority supersedes medical protocols. What are my orders?" "Your orders are exactly the same as they were this afternoon," Dr. Martinez replied firmly. "Nobody enters without being on the authorized list and having proper protective equipment. The safety of the entire kingdom depends on maintaining these protocols. If His Majesty wants to observe our work, we can arrange a video conference or a tour of non-contaminated areas, but the containment zone remains sealed." Marcus looked at Colonel Harrison and Wilson, both of whom had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand that the medical team was not going to simply defer to royal authority. "Colonel, Dr. Martinez says we can arrange alternative ways for His Majesty to observe the medical response, but the containment zone must remain sealed for public safety reasons." Colonel Harrison's face showed the first signs of genuine anger, and Marcus realized that the security chief was facing his own professional dilemma. He had been tasked with facilitating a royal visit, but he was now being told that fulfilling that task could potentially endanger the king and create a public health catastrophe. "Guard Chen," Harrison said, his voice taking on a more dangerous tone. "I want you to understand something very clearly. His Majesty has expressed his intention to personally observe this medical situation. He believes that royal presence during a crisis provides comfort and leadership to the people. When I return to report that a hospital security guard prevented that royal visit from occurring, there will be consequences that extend far beyond your job security." Wilson jumped into the conversation with obvious excitement. "Chen, you're making a career-ending mistake here. Do you really think you can defy royal authority and just go back to your normal security rounds? This is insubordination at the highest level.
Marcus looked at both men and realized that they were asking him to make a choice between his loyalty to proper medical protocols and his loyalty to royal authority. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that separated people who merely did their jobs from people who truly served the greater good.
"Gentlemen," Marcus said, "I took an oath when I started working here to protect the safety and welfare of everyone in this medical center. That includes patients, staff, visitors, and anyone else who enters this building. If allowing unauthorized access to a quarantine zone could spread a dangerous disease, then I cannot authorize that access regardless of who is requesting it." The elevator chimed again, and the doors opened to reveal 2 more security officers. These carrying equipment that suggested they were prepared to remove any obstacles to royal access by force if necessary. Colonel Harrison nodded to them, and Marcus understood that his window for peaceful resolution was rapidly closing. "This is your final opportunity, Guard Chen," Harrison said. "Step aside and allow us to conduct our security sweep, or face the consequences of obstructing royal business. The choice is yours, but choose quickly." Marcus looked down at the clipboard in his hands, reading the names of the 20 medical professionals who had been authorized to enter the containment zone. None of those names included royal security personnel, government officials, or even the king himself. Dr. Martinez had been very clear about the medical necessity of maintaining strict access controls. As he stood there, Marcus thought about his 12 years of service, his reputation for integrity, and his commitment to protecting the most vulnerable people in society. He thought about the patients behind the containment zone doors who were fighting for their lives, and he thought about the potential consequences of allowing political pressure to override medical judgment during a public health crisis. "Colonel Harrison," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "I cannot step aside. My orders are clear, and those orders are based on medical necessity, not political convenience. If His Majesty wants to visit this facility, I would be honored to escort him through any area that doesn't pose a public health risk. But this containment zone remains sealed." The corridor fell silent except for the humming of medical equipment and the distant sound of hospital operations continuing on other floors. Appropriate. Marcus had just refused to bend to royal authority, and everyone present understood that the consequences of that refusal were about to reshape his entire future. The silence that followed Marcus's refusal stretched through the hospital corridor like a taut wire ready to snap. Colonel Harrison stared at the security guard with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he couldn't quite believe, while Wilson shifted nervously from one foot to the other, clearly uncertain about how this confrontation would resolve itself. The elevator chimed again, and this time the doors opened to reveal a figure that made everyone in the corridor immediately straighten their posture. King Alexander III stepped out with the measured dignity that came from 40 years of royal training, his presence filling the space in a way that seemed to make the very air more formal. He was followed by his personal physician, Dr. Six Robert Sterling, and 2 additional advisors who remained respectfully in the background. Marcus had never been in the direct presence of royalty before, and he felt the natural human impulse to step aside and defer to supreme authority. But he also felt the weight of the clipboard in his hands, and remembered Dr. Martinez's urgent warnings about the infectious disease that was contained just meters away from where they all now stood. King Alexander looked around the corridor, taking in the scene with the calm assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating complex situations. His eyes moved from Colonel Harrison's tense posture to Wilson's anxious fidgeting, and finally settled on Marcus, who remained standing firmly in front of the containment zone entrance. "Your Majesty," Colonel Harrison said quickly, "this is Guard Chen. He has been refusing to provide access to the medical area where the outbreak patients are being treated. I was just explaining to him that royal authority supersedes hospital protocols." The king raised a hand slightly, a gesture so subtle that it barely qualified as movement, but everyone in the corridor immediately understood that Colonel Harrison should stop talking. King Alexander approached Marcus with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that rushing rarely improved complex situations. "Guard Chen," the king said, his voice carrying the refined accent of royal education, but also a warmth that Marcus hadn't expected. "I understand you have concerns about access to the medical treatment area. Could you explain those concerns to me directly?" Marcus felt his heart hammering against his chest, But his years of security training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, even when that pressure came from the most powerful person in the kingdom. Your Majesty, we have patients with a highly infectious respiratory illness in the containment zone behind me. The medical team has determined that unauthorized access could lead to disease transmission that might affect hundreds or thousands of people throughout the community. King Alexander nodded thoughtfully, and Marcus noticed that the monarch was listening with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding the situation rather than simply asserting his authority. And what would be required for authorized access? Marcus looked down at his clipboard, then back at the king. Your Majesty, Dr. Martinez has created a list of 20 medical professionals who have been trained in proper protective equipment and decontamination procedures. She has stated that nobody else should enter the containment zone regardless of their position or authority, because the risk of disease transmission is too high. Wilson stepped forward, clearly feeling that this was his moment to demonstrate his loyalty to royal authority. Your Majesty, Guard Chen has been refusing to acknowledge that royal prerogative supersedes hospital policies. This is clearly a case of insubordination that requires immediate correction. King Alexander turned to look at Wilson with an expression that was impossible to read, then returned his attention to Marcus. Guard Chen, how long have you worked at this medical facility? 12 years, Your Majesty, Marcus replied, surprised by the personal nature of the question. And in those 12 years, have you ever refused to follow legitimate orders from your superiors? Marcus thought about the question carefully before answering. No, Your Majesty. I have always followed orders that were consistent with my duty to protect the safety and welfare of everyone in this medical center. The king paused at Marcus's careful phrasing, and Marcus could see intelligent consideration in the monarch's eyes. So you believe that your current refusal to provide access is consistent with that duty? Yes, Your Majesty, Marcus replied without hesitation. Dr. Martinez has explained that anyone entering the containment zone without proper protection could become infected and then spread the disease to others. That would put the entire community at risk, including Your Majesty and your staff. King Alexander turned to Dr. Sterling, who had been quietly observing the conversation. Doctor, what is your assessment of the medical situation here? Dr. Sterling stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone who had advised royalty on medical matters for many years. Your Majesty, based on my preliminary review of the case reports, this appears to be a respiratory illness with a concerning transmission rate. The medical team's decision to implement strict containment protocols appears to be medically sound and consistent with international guidelines for infectious disease management. Colonel Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable as he realized that the conversation was not proceeding in the direction he had anticipated. Your Majesty, surely royal authority must take precedence over hospital policies. We cannot allow a security guard to dictate terms to the crown. King Alexander looked at Colonel Harrison with an expression that seemed to contain decades of accumulated wisdom. Colonel, I have been ruler of this kingdom for 15 years, and I have learned that true authority comes not from forcing compliance, but from making decisions that serve the welfare of all my subjects. If this medical professional believes that my presence in that treatment area could endanger public health, then perhaps we should listen to that professional judgment. Wilson's face went pale as he realized that the king was not going to simply override Marcus's refusal. Your Majesty, this sets a dangerous precedent. If hospital employees can refuse royal requests, it undermines the entire structure of governmental authority. The king turned to face Wilson fully, and Marcus could see that the monarch's patience with the administrator was wearing thin. Mr. Wilson, are you suggesting that my authority is so fragile that it cannot withstand being questioned when public safety is at stake? Are you implying that I would prioritize my personal desires over the welfare of my subjects? Wilson stammered, clearly realizing that he had overplayed his hand. No, Your Majesty, of course not. I simply meant that protocols should be observed and proper respect should be maintained. King Alexander looked back at Marcus, who had remained silent during the exchange between the royal officials. Guard Chen, I appreciate your commitment to protecting public safety, but I hope you understand that I have a responsibility to assess crisis situations personally so that I can make informed decisions about governmental response. How might we resolve this situation in a way that serves both public safety and royal responsibilities? Marcus felt a wave of relief as he realized that the king was treating this as a problem to be solved rather than a challenge to royal authority that needed to be crushed.
Your Majesty, Doctor.
Martinez mentioned that she could arrange video conferencing or tours of non-contaminated areas. Perhaps you could observe the medical response without entering the quarantine zone directly. Dr. Sterling nodded approvingly. That would be an excellent solution, Your Majesty. You could observe the medical procedures and speak with the treatment team without any risk of exposure to the infectious agent. King Alexander considered the suggestion for a moment, then turned to Colonel Harrison. Colonel, please coordinate with Dr. Martinez to arrange a comprehensive briefing that allows me to observe the medical response while maintaining appropriate safety protocols. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with and how our government can best support the medical team's efforts. Colonel Harrison looked like he wanted to object, but the king's tone made it clear that this was not a request open for debate. Yes, Your Majesty. I'll coordinate with the medical team immediately. As the royal entourage began to move away from the containment zone, King Alexander paused and turned back to Marcus. Guard Chen, I want to thank you for maintaining your commitment to duty even under difficult circumstances. It takes courage to uphold principles when facing pressure from authority, and that courage serves the entire kingdom well. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the unexpected praise from the monarch. Thank you, Your Majesty. I was just doing my job. King Alexander smiled slightly. No, Guard Chen, you were doing much more than your job. You were demonstrating the kind of principled decision-making that makes our society stronger. I hope that other people in positions of responsibility will show similar courage when faced with difficult choices. After the royal entourage departed, Marcus remained at his post, still somewhat stunned by how the confrontation had resolved itself. Wilson lingered in the corridor, his earlier smugness replaced by obvious embarrassment at having misjudged both the king's character and the likely outcome of the situation. Chen, Wilson said quietly, I want you to know that I was just trying to make sure we showed proper respect for royal authority. I wasn't trying to undermine medical protocols. Marcus looked at the administrator with a mixture of understanding and disappointment. Mr. Wilson, showing respect for authority doesn't mean abandoning professional judgment when people's lives are at stake. The king understood that, even if it took some time for the message to get through. Over the following hours, Marcus watched as the medical team worked with the royal staff to arrange a comprehensive briefing that allowed King Alexander to observe their efforts without compromising containment protocols. The solution satisfied both royal requirements and medical necessities, demonstrating that apparent conflicts between authority and expertise could often be resolved through thoughtful communication and mutual respect. Doctor? Martinez approached Marcus later that evening, her face showing exhaustion but also something that looked like pride. Marcus, I heard about what happened with the royal visit. Thank you for maintaining the protocols even under that kind of pressure. Your actions may have prevented this outbreak from becoming a much larger public health catastrophe. Marcus handed her the clipboard with its list of authorized personnel, a document that had become the symbol of his commitment to duty over convenience. Dr. Sadbeck. Martinez, I just followed the orders you gave me. But I have to admit, I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out when I found myself refusing to let the king's security team enter the containment zone. Dr. Martinez smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her since the crisis began. You know, Marcus, I've worked with a lot of security personnel over the years, and I can tell you that very few of them would have maintained professional standards under that kind of pressure. You didn't just follow orders. You understood why those orders existed, and you protected something bigger than any individual authority figure. As Marcus continued his shift that night, he reflected on the unexpected turn his career had taken. In a single day, he had gone from being an anonymous security guard to someone who had directly challenged royal authority and somehow emerged with his job intact and his principles validated. The outbreak was eventually contained through the strict protocols that Marcus had helped maintain, and the kingdom avoided what could have been a devastating pandemic. The story of his refusal to bow to inappropriate pressure became a subject of discussion in medical facilities, government offices, and security training programs throughout the region. Marcus Chen had proven that sometimes the most important service to authority comes through the courage to question it when necessary, and that true loyalty means protecting the greater good even when that protection requires standing against immediate pressure from powerful people. 3 weeks after the royal confrontation, Marcus Chen walked through the corridors of St. Mary's Medical Center with the same quiet dignity he had always carried. but now his steps echoed with a different kind of confidence. The outbreak had been successfully contained, with 0 cases of transmission beyond the original patients, and the medical team had developed protocols that were being studied and implemented in hospitals throughout the kingdom and beyond. The containment zone on the 4th floor had been decontaminated and returned to normal medical use, but a small plaque had been installed near the elevator bank where Marcus had made his stand. It read simply, "In recognition of professional courage and service of public health." Without mentioning his name directly, but everyone at the medical center knew exactly what it represented. Dr. Martinez approached Marcus at his usual security desk position, carrying a folder that she placed carefully in front of him. Her exhaustion from the crisis had been replaced by the satisfied look of someone who had successfully managed a potentially catastrophic situation through careful planning and unwavering commitment to medical principles. "Marcus," she said, "I wanted to share some information that I think you'll find interesting. The protocols we maintain during the outbreak have been adopted by the Royal Medical Council as the standard for infectious disease management throughout the kingdom. Your refusal to compromise those protocols has literally changed how we handle public health emergencies." Marcus opened the folder to find copies of official government documents outlining new national guidelines for medical facility security during health crises. The procedures bore a striking resemblance to the protocols he had defended so vigorously during the royal visit, and several sections specifically emphasized the importance of maintaining medical authority over political pressure during disease outbreaks. "Dr. Martinez," Marcus said, "I never imagined that following orders would have consequences this far-reaching. I was just trying to do my job according to the training and instructions you had given me." Dr. Fred Dash. Martinez sat down across from Marcus, something she had never done during their previous professional interactions. "Marcus, what you did wasn't just following orders. What you did was understanding the deeper purpose behind those orders, and having the courage to maintain that purpose even when powerful people tried to pressure you into abandoning it. That's not something that can be taught in security training manuals." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Harrison, who approached Marcus's desk with a significantly different demeanor than he had displayed during their previous encounter. The rigid military bearing was still present, but it was accompanied by something that looked almost like humility. "Guard Chen," Colonel Harrison said, "I wanted to speak with you about our interaction during the royal visit. I believe I may have initially misunderstood the situation, and I wanted to clarify some things about how the royal security detail will handle similar situations in the future." Marcus stood up, maintaining the respectful posture appropriate for addressing a high-ranking official, but without the defensive tension that had characterized their previous meeting. "Colonel Harrison, I hope you understand that I wasn't trying to obstruct royal business. I was trying to protect public safety, which I believed served His Majesty's interests as well." Colonel Harrison nodded, and Marcus could see that the security chief had spent considerable time thinking about the lessons learned from the outbreak crisis. "Chen, after reviewing the medical evidence and consulting with health experts, I've come to understand that your actions potentially prevented a public health disaster that could have affected thousands of people, including members of the royal family and government officials." The colonel paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "His Majesty has asked me to develop new protocols for royal visits during medical emergencies that balance security requirements with public health necessities. He was quite impressed with your willingness to maintain professional standards under pressure, and he has specifically requested that you be consulted during the development of these new protocols." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. The idea that his actions during a single night shift would lead to his involvement in developing royal security policies was almost impossible to process. "Colonel, I would be honored to provide any assistance that might be helpful, but I'm not sure what expertise I could offer beyond basic security procedures." Dr. Martinez smiled and gestured toward the folder of documents. "Marcus, your expertise isn't in security procedures. Your expertise is in maintaining professional integrity under pressure and understanding how individual decisions can affect larger community welfare. Those are exactly the kinds of perspectives that should inform policy development." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself participating in a series of meetings with medical experts, government officials, and royal advisors to develop comprehensive guidelines for managing the intersection of political authority and public health requirements during emergency situations. His role in these discussions was to represent the practical perspective of frontline personnel who had to implement policies under real-world conditions. The experience of contributing to policy development gave Marcus a new understanding of how individual actions could ripple outward to influence entire systems of governance and public safety. He began to see his work as part of a larger network of professionals who shared responsibility for protecting community welfare, rather than just an isolated security position at a single medical facility. James Wilson, the hospital administrator who had tried to pressure Marcus into ignoring medical protocols, had requested a transfer to a different facility shortly after the royal visit. His replacement, Dr. Patricia Hayes, was a former emergency medicine physician who understood the critical importance of maintaining medical authority during crisis situations. "Marcus," Dr. Hayes said during one of their first professional meetings, "I want you to know that your actions during the outbreak have been documented as a case study in professional ethics that will be used in healthcare administration training programs. You've helped establish a precedent that medical decisions should be made by medical professionals, even when political pressure suggests otherwise." The training programs that emerged from the outbreak response included Marcus's story as an example of how individual courage could serve broader community interests. Medical facilities throughout the region began implementing similar protocols for maintaining the integrity of quarantine zones, and security personnel were specifically trained in the importance of supporting medical authority during infectious disease emergencies. Marcus received a formal commendation from the Royal Medical Council, recognizing his contribution to public health protection during the outbreak. The ceremony was held at the medical center, with King Alexander personally presenting the award and speaking about the importance of principled decision-making in positions of public trust. "Guard Chen," King Alexander said during the presentation, "your actions remind us that authority is most legitimate when it serves the welfare of all citizens, and that sometimes the greatest service to authority comes through the courage to question it when necessary. You have demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that strengthens our entire society." The local media covered the story of Marcus's stand against inappropriate pressure, and he became something of a symbol for professional integrity in the face of political influence. Letters arrived from security personnel, medical workers, and government employees throughout the kingdom, thanking him for demonstrating that ordinary people could uphold extraordinary principles when circumstances demanded courage. Marcus remained at his position at St. Mary's Medical Center, but his role evolved to include training new security personnel in crisis management and professional ethics. He developed a reputation as someone who could teach others not just the technical aspects of security work, but the deeper principles of service that made security work meaningful. One evening, as Marcus walked through the same corridors where he had made his historic stand, he encountered a young security guard named David Park who had recently been hired and was struggling with the balance between following orders and exercising independent judgment. "Chen," David said, "I keep hearing about what happened during the outbreak, and I'm trying to understand how you knew you were making the right decision when everyone in authority was telling you to do something different." Marcus paused, thinking about how to explain a decision that had felt both terrifying and inevitable at the time. "David, I think the key was understanding that my ultimate loyalty wasn't to any individual person or authority figure, but to the purpose that all of those authority figures were supposed to serve. When I was asked to compromise public safety for political convenience, that request was actually asking me to betray the very principles that legitimate authority is supposed to protect." David nodded thoughtfully, and Marcus could see the young guard processing the implications of that perspective. "So you're saying that real loyalty sometimes means refusing to do what authority figures want?" "I'm saying that real loyalty means understanding what authority figures should want, based on their responsibilities to serve the greater good," Marcus replied. "When someone in authority asks you to do something that contradicts those responsibilities, the most loyal thing you can do is remind them of their higher obligations." As the months passed, Marcus watched as the protocols developed during the outbreak were tested in other medical facilities facing different types of emergencies. In every case, the emphasis on maintaining medical authority over political pressure proved effective in protecting public safety while still allowing legitimate governmental oversight of crisis response. The relationship between St. Mary's Medical Center and the royal government became a model for how medical facilities and political authorities could work together during emergencies while maintaining appropriate boundaries between their respective areas of expertise. Regular training exercises were conducted to ensure that both medical personnel and government officials understood their roles and responsibilities during crisis situations. Marcus Chen's name became associated with the principle that public service requires the courage to uphold professional standards, even when doing so creates personal risk. His story was included in ethics training for government employees, medical workers, and security personnel throughout the kingdom and beyond. Years later, when Marcus looked back on the night that changed his life, he realized that his moment of greatest professional challenge had also been his moment of greatest personal growth. By choosing to serve principles rather than personalities, he had discovered that individual actions could indeed influence the broader systems of governance and public safety that affected entire communities. The plaque near the fourth-floor elevator bank became a pilgrimage site for healthcare workers and public servants who wanted to remember that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things by maintaining their commitment to service, even under the most difficult circumstances. Marcus Chen had proven that sometimes the most important word in public service is no, and that the courage to use that word at the right moment could protect not just individual safety, but the integrity of entire systems designed to serve the common good. His legacy became a reminder that true authority comes not from the power to command compliance, but from the wisdom to know when compliance serves the greater good and when it does not. The loyal guard who defied the king to protect the medical suite had demonstrated that the highest form of loyalty is loyalty to the principles that make authority legitimate in the first place.